We're starting any second now. There we go. Now it's begun. I wish we had some good intro music to make this sort of like an event, but we don't. So welcome. I'm Stephen Sashen from XeroShoes.com, and I'm here with Al Kavadlo. This is just an impromptu chat. I dropped Al a note and said, hey, would you like to talk about, I don't think I even said anything about what we wanted to talk about. You immediately said yes, and so here we are. But I do have an agenda. Al, before I jump in and let you kind of introduce yourself, I do have to confess, over here in the office, everybody wants to change their name to Al Kavadlo. It's such a good...
It wouldn't be as unique of a name anymore, you know? So you'd Google it, and then there'd be a lot of people coming up all of a sudden.
True, but we'd all have the fun of having that kind of, rolls off your tongue sort of name. So, Al, I was realizing I have no memory of when or how we met, if it was me reaching out to you or you reaching out to me. Do you have any vague recollection of that?
It's funny. I was thinking about that the other day, too, and I couldn't remember who initiated the first contact. I'm pretty sure it was on Twitter. Because I remember it was probably like 2010, I want to say, when we first met up, and I had just read Born to Run, and I was looking to find a pair of huaraches, and I think I came across, at the time you were called Invisible Shoes, before it was Xero Shoes, and I think I came across your Twitter page and messaged you guys I was interested in it, and we started a dialogue from there, and that was it.
That sounds vaguely familiar. So, well, I'm glad we solved that. I'm really bad at remembering where and how I know people, and my joke is I'll meet some woman on the street and go, you look really familiar. Don't tell me. Okay, where do I know you from? She goes, I'm your mother. It's like, right, you're the one who lives at home and makes the cookies. So I'm glad we resolved that. Well, Al, one of the things, or I'll say this to people who are watching, one of the things that impressed me immediately about you is two things, actually. One, the first, is that you're known as a body weight fitness guy, and you're one of those freakishly fit dudes. And I don't know if you're doing anything with weights or not, but you spend a lot of time hanging out in a park in New York. I'll let you talk about doing that. That when I was living in Manhattan, people did not hang out in that park. And the other thing is that you're one of the people who I really appreciate who looks at exercise and looks at fitness and looks at biomechanics with a real desire to figure out what's true, what's essential, what works, and get rid of the extraneous stuff. And there are a lot of people who are sort of bound by mythology and what they learned before and what they read in a book somewhere and what someone told them works. But I don't see you doing that, so I've always really appreciated that. So that's my little intro about you. But for the sake of telling anyone who's watching, you can describe what it is you do and what makes you happy and have fun when you're out working in the fitness world.
Well, thanks for the kind words. I definitely, part of what makes you and I, kindred spirits is we're both minimalists. We both, have that philosophy of wanting to strip away all the stuff that isn't necessary and just get down to the bare essentials. That's what I love about Xero Shoes as a product, is it's just so simple and minimalist and basic. And that's what I love about the kind of workouts that I do, is, just get rid of a lot of that unnecessary equipment. And a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of dogma out there in the fitness world of you have to do X, Y, and Z if you want to, get strong or get lean or get fit. And a lot of that stuff comes from a place of sometimes just, people just perpetuating myths and not questioning them. And other times it comes from a place of somebody trying to make a profit off of misleading you into thinking that, well, you have to buy this fancy sneaker or this fancy gadget or whatever other stuff people are selling out there. I mean, that's part of what I love about your product also, is the price is very reasonable. Certainly within the world of running footwear, you're not going to find anything else as good as a Xero shoe that's comparable in price to it. And it's kind of amazing how expensive some of this stuff starts to get. But at the same time, I support capitalism. God bless if someone is willing to pay $190 for a pair of running sneakers, and then the person who's selling it to them, right? I can't be mad at that.
Well, there's a really amazing documentary called Just for Kicks, written, produced and written, if you want to call it a documentary, written by a guy that I met recently. Amazing documentary about the evolution of sneaker culture and hip hop culture and how those two really played into each other. By the way, I just realized I totally forgot we were doing this. I didn't shave today. You have not shaved in what, 2 or 3 days?
It's been a little longer than that for me, yeah. I did do a little neck shave, and I do the dome every day, so.
But anyway, so Just for Kicks, it's very interesting about the evolution of sneakers and hip hop. Terry is thinking of making a new movie about what he's learned and what he's started to think about differently since he made Just for Kicks 8 years ago, because then it was sort of fascinating. Look at how these things are co-evolving. Now you see these kids in the inner city who are spending thousands and thousands of dollars on their sneaker collection because it's a big status symbol, to where some of them are becoming or robbing and doing illegal things to get the money to do that. I mean, it's become a whole thing where the shoe industry has no problem with what's going on because they're selling tons and tons and tons and tons of shoes at really exorbitant prices. It's a fascinating is a euphemism for a really upsetting kind of trend. But anyway, backing up to fitness things.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about your favorite workout location in the East Village?
Well, you know what it is already, Tompkins Square Park, that famous jungle gym with that yellow arch and those blue monkey bars and all that stuff. I mean, that place is kind of, like you said, it's changed a lot in the last couple decades. When I was a kid, I grew up in Brooklyn, and yeah, you didn't go to Tompkins Square Park in the 80s unless, you were a drug addict or looking for trouble of some kind. But, there's a lot of talk in New York about, the gentrification and how the city's changed. And there's pros and cons to that. A lot of people who've lived in the city for a long time, are annoyed when you see like a Subway sandwich or a McDonald's popping up on First Avenue. But the give and take in that is that
it's the Whole Foods on the Bowery that freaks me out.
See, I don't mind Whole Foods because at least they have a good product. Subway and McDonald's, that's just garbage. I'd rather have a real restaurant. But yeah, whatever the issue people have, the good of it is that places like Tompkins Square Park are now safe places for anyone to go work out or for kids to play and stuff. And it's really starting to become kind of like this underground subculture over there, where we have this regular crew of 20 or 30 people who you see there around a lot. And then you get a lot of tourists, people who've seen them on the web, and they're visiting New York, and that's like one of the things they want to do.
It just hit me. Tompkins Square Park is the Venice Beach of Manhattan.
That's exactly what it is.
Muscle Beach of Manhattan.
That's exactly what it is. It's the East Coast Venice Beach.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that there's a lot of, back in let's see, when did I first move to Manhattan? 1980. So I was a gymnast way back when, and I'd go hang out in Central Park and tumble with these guys who had never been on a gymnastics mat in their life. They had never been trained in their life. They just went out and figured it out and were some insane tumblers. I imagine there's guys like that you're working out with who have never been in a gym in their life and are just freaks.
That's right, yeah. I've never had very much formal gymnastic training of any kind. A lot of what I've learned has been, to a certain extent, trial and error, or, learning from people in much less formal settings. But, a lot of the movement, something I always say is movement, and it doesn't matter what label you want to put on. If you want to call it, calisthenics or gymnastics or bodyweight training or yoga or whatever, these are all related disciplines. And the body moves the way the body moves.
It's true, and there's lots of different ways that it moves. There's people who run, there's people who walk, there's people who hike, there's people who lift, there's people who fill in the blank. One of the things I remember when we first did meet is you were sending me pictures and videos that you were running across the Brooklyn Bridge every day. So how does running in general fit into what you're doing, both professionally, working with people, and just your personal life?
Well, I love to be well-rounded in my fitness regimen. So, in the strength training world, there's not that many people who are also doing things like marathons and triathlons and stuff. But I like to get involved with everything. As a coach and as a personal trainer, you want to have as much varied experience as possible because clients are coming to you with all sorts of diverse, backgrounds and diverse goals that they want to work on. So part of the reason I got into running in the first place was just because I felt like it made me more marketable as a trainer. And then I started to genuinely enjoy it, and then wanted to get more into it for that. But something like running a marathon, there's a lot of backlash against that. Like as marathon running becomes more and more popular, you get a lot of people in the fitness community coming out and saying, "Oh, distance running is bad for you. You're going to mess up your knees. You're going to hurt yourself. It's going to make you weak. Blah blah blah." And so. I'm someone who likes to defy, other people's expectations. So something that was important to me is say, hey, look at me. I'm a guy who can do, 25 pull-ups and, whatever amount of push-ups and muscle-ups and all this stuff, and I'm still going to run a marathon, and I'm still going to train for a triathlon. And so that was a fun thing for me to show that the two things don't have to be these polar opposite ends of the spectrum. Body weight training includes running and swimming, and it can include cycling and anything that the body is doing is fair game. I want to be well-rounded. I always say, a truly fit person, it's not enough to just be strong. You've got to be able to run a couple miles. You've got to be able to swim to shore if you find yourself in a plane crash or whatever. Fitness means being able to handle yourself in any sort of situation.
Yeah, if they land another plane in the East River or the Harlem River. Well, let's do the other side of that. I don't know if you work with people who are in the situation I'm about to describe, but here in Boulder, this is a very running-centric town, and there's a lot of crazy accomplished athletes in general and runners in particular. One of my favorite stories, Lorraine Muller, who was the bronze medalist in the Atlanta Olympics in the marathon, she says, one day I went to for one of the turkey trot runs around Thanksgiving because I wanted to win the turkey. And I show up at the starting line, and I look to my left, and I look to my right, and there's 4 other Olympians. And it's like that. When I go train on certain tracks here, it's wall to wall world champions and Olympians, and it's really crazy. But one of the things that's fascinating to me is that there's a lot of these runners, even very successful runners, who have no strength training at all and have no strength whatsoever. And I see them running, and every time they hit the ground, their whole body collapses. And I'm not their coach, and I don't try to inject myself into conversations that I'm not invited into. But I look at that and think, you guys, if you just did some real fundamental basic strength training, that would make a huge difference in your running. And then there's the flip side, where there are a handful of coaches here in town who every time there's some new gadget that comes out, suddenly their runners are using it. And these people are taking like a 4-pound shot and trying to throw it backwards over their head, and they can barely do it. It's like, well, why don't you work on some basics before you try anything kind of goofy, and then you'll get stronger at the goofy stuff too. But what's your take? What's your experience on that? The flip side, the runners who need to get stronger.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of that. I'm fortunate in the sense that I didn't get into running until I'd already been doing strength training for a lot of years. So a lot of the problems that new runners have, I didn't encounter because I was already pretty strong. So I didn't get, I didn't mess up my knees or mess up my hips or anything like that. Even though my form was not so good when I first got into running, this is the case for a lot of people. And then, like anything, the more you get into it, you start exploring more literature, you start training with other people and talking to other coaches and refining your technique and, refining your skill set. So, but it's definitely true. And it's amazing, like you said, how sometimes someone can be so skilled in one very specific discipline and such a complete, beginner in something else. Like something I always talk about in fitness is the specificity principle. And that just means you get good at the thing you do. So people ask me all the time, like, hey, Al, how do I get better at pull-ups? Or how do I get better at push-ups? Or I want to learn this. I'm like, well, you get better by doing it. Right. If you can only do 1 or 2 pull-ups today, well, you do 1 or 2 pull-ups today, and then maybe in a week you can do 2 or 3. And then if you keep, it's the same way you add mileage while you're building up to a marathon. Just little by little, you keep gradually adding to it.
So if you were going to work with a runner who, from your perspective, was weak, and let's just assume for the sake of argument that all runners are, and I'm not trying to tease runners. I mean, I'm a sprinter by trade, and but in a way I'm saying this thinking like all human beings could use to get stronger. There's no one who couldn't get a little stronger in a way that would be helpful. There's a line about sprinters that speed is made in the weight room, and I think safe running, safe walking, safe hiking is also, if not in the weight room, made by doing strength training. So if you were going to give someone like the world's simplest workout or simplest bits of advice or suggestions about things to do to become stronger as a walker, runner, hiker, anything you're doing on your feet, what would you recommend?
Well, yeah, definitely, like you said, strength training is the way to go. The most fundamental strength training exercises, lower body ones, just the basics: the squat, lunge, step-ups, deadlifts. You could just do those 4 exercises, or even just pick like 2 of those 4 exercises and do a 6-week strength training cycle. And then when you go back to the running, your muscles are going to be a lot stronger. So that would definitely help. But it's such a specific thing. Different people need to strengthen different parts of their anatomy. Sometimes runners tend to get very quad dominant, depending on how their technique is. So for someone like that, you might want to try to work more on their hamstrings and their glutes. I'm a big fan of doing back bridges as a great way to build the hamstrings and the glutes, and it's also a great mobility drill for the upper body.
Interesting.
So,
the only thing
for runners.
The only thing I'm curious, because I would add to that, would be some form of plank, something that's an abdominal core activity, but isn't about flexion, because no one actually runs by doing this, but you run by trying to avoid doing that. So I'm a big fan of plank stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great one for sure.
And then you and I can have a flag off, and we'll get people doing flags.
That would be great. I'd love that.
It's one of my favorite things that I can still do some of those things at what am I 51 right now, just because when I show up at certain places, it's kind of like I'll go to an open track meet where it's all high school kids, and I'll beat the vast majority of them. And then I walk up to those guys and go, "Hey, I'm older than your dad," and I just like to see which ones that inspires. And it's the same thing with doing freakish strength stuff like flags or Chinese pole kind of things. I think there's a certain instant credibility that you can get, and I know you do a lot of those, kind of things that make people just go, "Oh my God!"
Yeah, I mean, the flag is one of those moves that always gets people's attention.
It's very
So it's always a fun one to bust out, especially if someone's not expecting you to come out with that. And yeah, suddenly they'll take you more seriously. A big thing for me, and you might get this too. Like I'm a fairly lean, small guy. I weigh about 160 pounds and about 5'11". So if I'm not wearing a tight T-shirt, I don't really look like I work out much. I just look like a skinny guy. So sometimes people are really thrown off if they see me in I'm wearing like a baggy sweatshirt and I start busting out flags and muscles. They're like, people think they associate huge muscles with being strong, but there's not always that direct of a correlation.
It's true. So let's do a little twist. So was Born to Run your intro into barefoot, or had you been experimenting and playing with that prior to reading the book that set off the entire chain of events that we're now part of?
Yeah, no, I'd already been running for a while before I came across Born to Run, and that was my intro to barefoot or minimalist running. But yeah, prior to that, I mean, I was buying the $170 Asics and thinking this is the thing that's going to make me a better runner. So I mean, I only came to the conclusions that I was talking about earlier about keeping things simple and minimalist by going the full circle and trying everything out there, and eventually concluding like, wait a minute, none of this stuff is really making that big of a difference. The thing that's making the difference is the doing it. And sometimes in the beginning, something like buying a new pair of sneakers gives somebody the accountability to go out and run because they're like, I invested this money into sneakers. And it's kind of like a new toy. It gives you something to play with. But the thing that makes them a better runner isn't the new sneakers. It's the going out and running. So I always tell people, if you need to buy new sneakers to make yourself accountable to run, then do it. But don't think that the sneakers are what's going to make you a good runner.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like for you making that transition from $175 sneakers to not?
Well, certainly easier on my checking account.
Absolutely.
But like anyone who starts getting into barefoot running, you have to adapt your technique, and there's an adjustment period. Your calves get really sore in the beginning. Your feet, you're waking up muscles in your feet that aren't used to getting worked. So I went through that same transition like anyone else. But when you come out of that transition, your stride feels so much more efficient. The whole process becomes more pleasant. And it really gets you in touch more with what you're doing. Like something I always say about running is it can be a really awesome meditation because you have to be really present for every footfall, especially if you're running barefoot or running in something really minimal. Because the minute you start checking out and mentally going elsewhere, your form starts falling apart, and you're woken up by your heel thudding on the ground, and it's like, and it brings you back into the moment. So I'm a big fan of running for that, for the mental benefits as well as the physical ones.
There's a friend of mine who says a similar thing. He's not a runner, he's a walker, but he said as soon as I started going barefoot or wearing Xero shoes, just taking my dog out for a walk was like instant meditation because there's so many nerves in the bottom of your feet. Your brain is designed to feel all that stuff. When you give it the opportunity to, it's really quite compelling. I mean, my second barefoot run, I was so fascinated with the experience, with the sensations and the experiment of what happens if I change my gait, if I take a longer stride or a shorter stride or a faster stride or a slower stride, if I land on my forefoot or my midfoot or flat footed. I just kept playing around. And the next thing I knew, I had run over 5K, and I had never run a 5K in my life. And when I told my sprinting training partners, they literally thought I was kidding. So
that's a beautiful thing, when you can just be so in the moment with it that you don't even realize how much distance is adding up.
Yeah, that's the part that I really enjoy too. There's that constant it's not, I don't want to get metaphysical about it, but there's just something very satisfying about feeling the world. And
Absolutely.
yeah, people don't really appreciate that. And what's amazing to me, and I don't say this just because I've got our company with our product, but what's amazing to me is the number of people who've been in things that were called barefoot or called minimalist, and they think that they've been doing that, and then they actually, and I've met so many people who ran in Five Fingers or New Balance somethings or Merrell somethings who called themselves barefoot runners, and they've never actually had their bare feet touch the ground.
Right. I mean, that's just because it's a marketing buzzword. So you can't necessarily blame the person for that because they've been misled
Absolutely.
by marketing. But
Absolutely.
that's something that I've always found hilarious too, is people who are into barefoot running but have never actually run barefoot. And I
So
mean, you get posers in every aspect of life. And one of two things happens with those people. They either eventually get serious about it and realize that, okay, this is not really what I thought it was, or they move on to another fad that they're not really into, and then that's the flavor of the month for them.
so
Just kind of like passing around.
it's true. Well, people are going to ask. It just occurs to me, so I'll ask on their behalf. So, do you actually spend real live barefoot time in and around New York City?
I do, yeah. There was a day, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was wearing I got like a new pair of sneakers or something, and I was walking around. They were just really damn uncomfortable. And I was just like, I'm just going to take them off and walk home barefoot. And I was just carrying them walking down the street, getting some really weird looks. And one guy even stopped me. He's like, what are you doing? You're going to get a disease. And I was like, I'm going to be fine. And I was fine. A lot of time at the park, once I get there, I'll take my shoes off and, run around on the playground barefoot. But, like what you were saying before about how you really get in touch with the sensation, of the tactile sensation when you're barefoot. That's part of what I love about body weight training in general, is it forces you to have to really be super aware of what you're doing. So much of conventional gym training, has you sitting on a chair doing a very isolated sort of movement where you're pushing something or pulling something on a guided track. And, I always say that's going through the motions. It's not really creating movement. When you have to do a freestanding push-up or a freestanding squat and you don't have a track to guide you through the movement, there's a lot more that has to happen in the just the proprioceptive world of bringing your awareness to your body in space, and you can't just tune out. And that's something, whether you're doing minimalist running or doing minimalist strength training, that's a universal thing that's there for both.
It's true. Now, I mean, you've got sort of the urban jungle that you work out in. Have you ever bumped into or hung out with the other people who are talking about, let's call it natural fitness, for lack of a better term, so like Erwan and the gang that are trying to take fitness like you are out of the gym and into nature?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a little bit of experience with that. I'm mostly in New York most of the time, so there's not that much of that available here. We've got the urban playgrounds. But, when I've visited other places, I'm always about, work with whatever is available. So there have been times where I've been in more, rural parts, and I've, run on trails or climbed trees or done, stuff crawling over logs and all that stuff. And it's great to mix up your environment, because it's what we were saying before about the specificity principle. So you get really comfortable in one atmosphere, and then you try to transfer the same moves you're doing into a different thing, and it's almost like starting over again. So it keeps you humble, and it keeps it fun, and it keeps it fresh.
I'm trying to think about what the running version of this would be. Riffing on what you were saying, every now and then I start noticing patterns that I have, little subtle patterns that I have, and I try to mix them up. So normally I cross my arms this way, and so once I notice that, I spend a lot of time doing it the other way.
Crossing the other way.
And it's gotten to the point now where I don't actually remember which way I do it. Or similarly, I noticed I put on my pants left foot first, so I started trying right foot first, and doing all those little things. And it's very entertaining. I don't know if it has any real benefits other than being kind of interesting. But I wonder what other than doing what you were just describing, like if you're going out for a run, jumping over logs, just interrupting it by doing some pull-ups on a tree, whatever else. What are the other ways that you could take running, which couldn't be more cyclical, it couldn't be more in a loop, and break that pattern?
Well, what's interesting is I feel like a lot of runners do tend to favor one leg. You ever see guys who run like that, where it's like kind of good gun, like one.
Well, what I see a lot of is people
the
who have
race.
I see people who will have a pattern with one leg and not the other, and they don't notice it. So their right leg, for example, will land perfectly, and their left leg overstrides. It's like
Hmm.
when someone says to me, I'm getting a pain in one leg, or I got a blister on one foot, or I'm wearing, getting some wear on my shoe on one side. I say I love those unilateral things because clearly your good side has already figured out what the bad side hasn't figured out yet. Pay attention to the good side, and the other side will, get with the program. I love unilateral, but I hadn't really thought about it. So what would if you bumped into someone who really was sort of out of whack with a left-right imbalance, what would you do with them?
Well, I'd try to get them to work each leg independently. I'm a big fan of single leg squats, and there's a whole lot of different ways that you can vary the intensity. Because someone has to be fairly strong to do any kind of single leg squat to begin with, so you got to establish a decent movement pattern on a two-legged squat first. But once that's established, I like to get people, working each leg separate, so it can kind of help the squeaky wheel get some grease, as it were. But to a certain extent, a right-handed person is almost always going to be dominant on their right hand. You hear these stories about, kids who grew up, a couple of generations ago, if they were left-handed and they were forced to write with their right hand, they kind of become ambidextrous.
Right.
But outside of an extreme example like that, someone who's lived their whole life as a right dominant person, it's really hard to completely balance them out. So you just try to get it as symmetrical as you can. You try to bring the weaker side to catch up a little bit. But on a certain level, you just have to accept that the body's not going to be perfectly symmetrical. As much as we want to strive for symmetry and we want to try to, bring that weaker side up, the reality of it is that you may always have certain imbalance. I always try to get people out of this hypothetical mindset, because so many people in fitness are always just like, I've got this great plan on paper, and I'm going to just do exactly A, B, and C, and then boom, I'm going to get there. And it's like, well, the plan on paper doesn't always play out exactly how you think it is. So it's important to have a plan, and it's important to also recognize that that plan is going to have to constantly be changed and reevaluated.
That's so true in so many domains that people don't appreciate. Everyone really does think, especially with fitness, or even with barefoot running, people want me to give them some fixed prescription for what to do, for how to train, for how much to run, for how often to run. And I always say that, it's just not possible. Everyone's different. I've got some proof on what's different cognitively, but it goes way beyond the physical thing. I think there's evolutionary psychological reasons why we want to know what things are and how to put things in a box, but it never works that way. Even so, it's true for fitness. It's also kind of funny. I have this conversation all the time about business. People, when we're talking about raising money, they say, well, let me see your projections for next year. And I go, well, here they are, but this is complete fiction, right? That tomorrow something is going to happen that's going to make all of this completely meaningless. And very rarely do I find someone in the business world who's honest enough with themselves and with reality to say, oh yeah, I know it's completely not true. I just want to see that you've thought it through.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I think you got to do with program design. So many trainers or athletes want to have you write out like 12 weeks of workouts, and it's like I don't even know what you're going to be able to do right now. Certainly don't know what you're going to be able to do in 12 weeks.
Yeah,
yeah, you're right. There's definitely something inherent in people that wants to feel like they can follow this thing to the letter and it's going to play out perfectly, but life is never like that.
No, and it's the thing that I find so interesting about barefoot running is that more than anything I've ever done, it really does, at least for me and for people that I've heard, hundreds and maybe thousands of people that I've heard, it's almost impossible not to start or not to stop looking for some external structured, rigid thing, and you have to start paying more attention to what feels good, what feels right, the way you do it. People often ask me, how do I land on my foot? It's like, I don't know, let's see how you land on your foot. Because when we look, it's not the same.
One second.
Yep. Oh, wait, we've got guitars in the background.
Sorry about that. I actually got to get going in a minute.
Oh, perfect. Well, then...
No, I mean, it's so true. Right, you have to, it's like people want you to know them. You just met them 1 minute ago. It's like, I don't know how you land, and I'll see what it looks like, right?
Well, you just gave me a great idea, which I really like, which is taking the basic ideas of some of the things you do. So bodyweight stuff, whether it's squats, lunges, step-ups, push-ups, planks, backward bending things. It's like just what I always say to people about barefoot running, here's these basic ideas. Find a nice, smooth, hard surface. Take off your shoes. Go for a short run. If it hurts, do something different till it's fun. Use fun as your guideline. And I think that adding what you're doing with getting people stronger, doing body weight and using whatever happens to be around them, adding that component of like break up your run anytime. This would be my teaching. This is the rigid, non-rigid teaching. Anytime you're not having fun running, stop and do something fun like what you would teach.
I love it. I think that's a good note to end on. I got to run right now. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we'll get to do it again soon.
Well, my pleasure too, Al. And just so to let everyone know, if they want to learn more about what you're doing, they can go to alkavadlo.com. I'm going to post some links below here about the books that you've got, which I'm very proud to say. There's lots of pictures of you wearing your Xero shoes, doing your workouts. Anything we can do to help, we're big fans over here, and I really look forward to what you're doing next.
Likewise. Thanks very much.
Yeah, pleasure. Take care. Feel
All
the
right,
world.
bye, Stephen.